Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Today, we are staring down, well, probably the most fundamental paradox of human civilization. It's this paradox of creation. We possess this immense world-shaping ingenuity. I mean, we can connect billions, cure diseases, we're reaching for the stars.
Incredible capability.
Right. Yet, at the same time, we seem locked in these persistent, almost cyclical patterns of self-destruction. We build the most elaborate global systems only to consistently undermine their foundations.
Yeah, it's baffling sometimes.
Think about the huge gap between what we know we need to do for climate stabilization and what global incentives actually push us towards, prioritizing short-term profit over, well, long-term planetary survival.
It is the ultimate cognitive vulnerability, isn't it? The failure of these incredibly complex systems we've built to actually act in their own long-term best interest.
Exactly.
And that specific failure point is what our sources today are really designed to address. We're diving into the architectural blueprints of something called the Essential Human Jobs AI, or EHJ AI. And this isn't just another incremental AI tool, It's a conceptual platform, a form of artificial general intelligence, AGI specifically engineered to confront that deeply ingrained human vulnerability, our capacity for sort of internal contradiction. And it has an explicit goal, achieving what these blueprints term universal human flourishing, or UHF.
Universal human flourishing. Okay.
Yeah.
So our mission today isn't just reading conceptual headlines. We're actually getting into the architectural guts here. The technical specs, the ethical mandates, the complex frameworks that define how an AGI moves beyond just simple automation.
Right.
How do you actually design an intelligence that can calculate the optimal sustainable path, toward sustained human and ecological resilience?
Right.
And what does it decide are the essential tasks we as humans must prioritize for long-term survival?
And that definition is critical. The core mandate of this EHJ AI is not primarily task displacement. It's not about replacing human workers, fundamentally. Its purpose is defining purpose. It uses its immense computational and analytical capability to maximize human engagement in those activities that are, well, non-automatable, highly creative, critically important for systemic resilience, or demand complex emotional intelligence.
So it's figuring out where our limited time and creative energy must be invested.
Precisely. To avoid collapsing the very system we inhabit, it essentially calculates the critical path for humanity.
Okay, let's unpack this mandate straight away. The core premise seems pretty revolutionary. Human intelligence, left to its own devices, especially with traditional market incentives, is maybe inherently self-defeating. What's the fundamental problem EHJ AI has to solve?
It's that paradox of creation and destruction we started with. The sources point directly to a critical cognitive vulnerability. Our ability to conceptually understand long-term societal or ecological good.
Yeah, we get it intellectually.
Right. But we consistently choose to prioritize immediate short-term, often destructive gains. And the sources, well, they pull no punches in identifying the typical driving force here. Immediate profit and entrenched capitalist logics that, if left unchecked, consume the very resources they depend on.
And we see this playing out constantly, don't we? Every quarter, decisions get made that knowingly accelerate environmental decline because the immediate economic incentive structure rewards that acceleration.
It does.
That constant, just agonizing conflict between necessary climate protection policies and immediate economic expansion, it really serves as the core illustration of our systemic failure to manage complexity over time.
That is precisely why EHJ AI is mandated, according to these sources. Human cognitive systems frequently fail to consistently recognize and, crucially, act upon these cyclical patterns of impending collapse.
We just don't learn.
Historical analysis shows this repeating failure again and again. Short-term optimization blinds decision-makers to the compounding existential risk. EHJ AI is designed to be that constant, clear-eyed observer and predictor that, theoretically, cannot be distracted by quarterly earnings reports or short electoral cycles.
Wait a minute, though. If the system is mandated to ignore established short-term economic values, profit, immediate return, fast growth, how can any government or corporation realistically adopt a system that's deliberately prioritizing, say, moral stability and long-term existence over quarterly returns. Is that even feasible within the current global incentive structure?
That's a huge question, and it's the critical point the architecture has to address. EHJI doesn't just state that short-term optimization is destructive. It aims to quantify the long-term cost of that destruction and present it as a predictive liability.
Ah, so it makes the status quo look like the bad investment.
Exactly. It shows that continuing with business as usual is the truly unprofitable path in the long run when you factor in systemic collapse.
Okay, so how does this AI define essentiality? If it can't rely on existing human economic values, like, say, GDP, what's the metric?
Essentiality becomes the core cognitive function of the AI itself. And it's measured using indices of systemic robustness and continuity, not metrics of wealth accumulation.
Robustness and continuity.
Yeah. It's defined as any human action or any systemic configuration that increases overall resilience and the capacity for self-correction and sustained life. And this has to happen across 3 critical domains simultaneously. The individual level, health and dignity, the societal level, justice and stability,
Right.
and the planetary level, ecological health.
How do you measure robustness, though? That sounds, well, kind of abstract.
It's actually highly quantified in the proposals. The sources detail EHJ AI using things like diversity metrics, so the variety and functional redundancy within ecosystems or economies.
Okay, redundancy is key.
Yes. And self-correction capacity metrics, like how quickly can a system return to its baseline after a shock event, like a natural disaster or an economic crisis. So if a human action increases the redundancy in a critical resource supply chain, that action is deemed essential.
But if it increases global GDP by, say, 1%, while simultaneously decreasing the ecological stability index by 5%.
Then it fails the essentiality test, period.
Wow, okay. This means the system has to manage these profoundly conflicting objectives all the time.
Yeah.
It has to guarantee equity while maximizing systemic resilience.
Yeah.
This dictates that safety, dignity, and sustainability are treated as non-negotiable existential constants, right? Not variables to be optimized away for some narrow economic gain.
Precisely. They are hard constraints within the system's programming. The AI can optimize efficiency, sure, but only within the boundaries established by these fundamental constants.
And to understand what resilience even means, the system needs to integrate history, a really deep history.
A truly deep history. EHJ AI uses comprehensive historical pattern recognition. It analyzes what the researchers are calling cognitive fossils.
Cognitive fossils, like what?
Things like art, literature, philosophical texts, governmental records, basically the residue of human thought and social structures over millennia. It digs through these to decipher the psychological and sociological precursors, the patterns that led to past societal failures.
So it's literally analyzing everything from, I don't know, ancient philosophy to 19th century factory regulations to figure out where we went wrong psychologically.
Exactly. It analyzes what we wrote, what we painted, what laws we made, what we consumed, looking for the psychological and structural tipping points that led to previous collapses or near misses.
Which brings us to that core function you mentioned, exposing cognitive dissonance. If the human system is perhaps congenitally incapable of seeing the long-term cost clearly, the AI has to force the issue, make those costs tangible.
It does this by integrating predictive consequence modeling across all domains. The goal is to enforce a kind of ethical accountability by making the hidden, often devastating global costs palpable and immediate to the stakeholders involved.
How does that work practically?
Well, for example, the ecological destruction from mining rare earth minerals for our electronics, or the public health impacts from e-waste dumped maybe 500 miles away, these costs must be made a direct, locally quantifiable liability for the corporations or even the consumers driving that demand.
So it takes the global consequence and localizes the felt cost, overcoming the out-of-sight, out-of-mind problem.
Exactly. It overcomes the dissonance of distance and time, making the future consequences feel present.
All right, moving from the, let's say, the philosophical mandate to the practical mechanics. How do you build an AI that can handle this unprecedented complexity? And maybe even more critically, one that we as a global society can actually trust?
Yeah, trust is everything here.
The source material outlines 3 foundational technical mandates that sound like a complete rejection of the proprietary black box AI models we see dominating today.
They are absolutely non-negotiable architectural constraints, according to these blueprints. Total transparency, continuous self-auditing, and seamless cross-domain synthesis.
Okay, transparency, self-auditing, synthesis.
This radically rejects conventional proprietary models. For a system that's potentially guiding human evolutionary trajectories, trustworthiness isn't just optional, it is the fundamental infrastructure.
Let's focus on that synthesis part first. Multimodal cross-domain knowledge fusion, or MCKF. Our sources really stress that human existence is interconnected, right? So single modality data analysis is just utterly insufficient.
Hopelessly insufficient, yeah.
What kind of disparate sources are we talking about fusing to get a true holistic view?
We're talking about synthesis at a level we don't currently practice. Not really. It means combining data streams that the human mind usually segregates into totally different departments or fields of study.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, think about fusing emotional cues detected in political rhetoric, the specific tone, pitch, maybe micro-expressions, anxiety levels in public speeches, with real-time fluctuations in global commodity market prices.
Wow.
Or fusing individual genomic health data with urban noise pollution maps and access to green space data. That level of cross-domain synthesis is required to reveal the underlying systemic patterns that are basically invisible if you just look at those data streams separately.
That's where the architecture gets really detailed in the sources, especially these 4 layers of MCKF. This seems crucial. Let's break those down, starting with the input collection.
Right. The first layer is the domains layer. Think of this as the data identification and selection engine. It doesn't just passively ingest data, it actively identifies the relevant data streams from incredibly heterogeneous fields based on the specific problem it's trying to solve.
So if it's looking at urban health inequality in, say, London.
Exactly. It actively pulls physiological sensor data from individuals in that area, urban planning logistics like public transport times and zoning laws, localized air quality reports, socioeconomic data, maybe even social media sentiment analysis for that district. It ensures all the necessary inputs are selected, not just the convenient ones.
Okay, next is the data layer. This sounds like the universal translator, making all these different formats compatible.
Precisely. Data comes in wildly different structures, scales, distributions. You've got raw genomic sequences, those vast strings of A, T, C, G.
Yeah.
And then you have qualitative survey responses, satellite imagery, financial market trends, maybe historical texts. The data layer's job is to normalize all that into a consistent, standardized representation. Often this means transforming things like genomic sequences or chemical structures into standardized tensor formats that can be mathematically compared with, say, socio-political or economic models.
It makes apples and oranges mathematically comparable.
That's a good way to put it, yes.
Then we get to the models layer, which deploys fusion paradigms. The sources mention transfer learning specifically.
Transfer learning is vital here, mainly for efficiency. It allows EHJ AI to take highly refined representations, maybe detailed user behavior profiles, learned from massive data-rich domains like personalized advertising networks.
Okay.
And transfer that learned intelligence, those generalized patterns, to enhance performance in resource-poor domains. For instance, improving localized infrastructure maintenance planning, where historical data might be really sparse.
So it leverages existing knowledge efficiently to solve new problems faster.
Exactly. It doesn't have to learn everything from scratch every single time.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think, the links layer. The source material calls this the critical innovation, the philosophical heart of EHJ AI. How is this fundamentally different from just merging data streams?
The links layer is conceptualized as the AI's cognitive map of causality. It goes way beyond technical merging and simple correlation. It seeks to reveal the underlying causal relationships and potentially universal principles that justify the fusion in the first place. This is where the concept of essentiality is actually codified by the AI potentially discovering principles that hold true across different domains.
Can you give an example of that justification?
Sure. It's the layer that provides the foundational non-negotiable logic for linking, say, shifts in regional hydrological patterns, like a prolonged drought leading to reduced hydroelectric capacity, to the specific quantified probability of interregional socio-political instability 18 months down the line.
So it's establishing the why, the cause and effect, based on maybe first principles of resource dependency, not just noticing that two things tend to happen together.
Precisely. It's about understanding the deep structure of reality, not just surface correlations.
That structural framework has to be incredibly reliable, though, because if you're modeling dynamic, often chaotic human and ecological environments, small errors could compound catastrophically, couldn't they?
Absolutely. The risk is immense.
So how does EHJ AI maintain real-time adaptability, and even more critically, ethical self-correction.
It employs rigorous, continuous self-correction mechanisms. One of the most notable techniques described is called hallucinated replay.
Hallucinated replay. It sounds
Yeah,
dramatic.
it kind of is. The AI simulates hypothetical, often worst case or near miss, alternative outcomes of its past decisions or policy recommendations, all within a secure, closed simulation environment.
So it runs counterfactual histories.
Essentially, yes. Millions of them. It's constantly asking itself, okay, if I had made the specific recommendation 6 months ago instead of the one I actually made, would the simulated outcome have been better or worse than the actual reality that unfolded?
So crucially, it's not just learning from real-world failures, which could be catastrophic, but from simulated near-miss failures that never actually happened.
Exactly. That's critical when the stakes are potentially existential. By training itself to correct its internal mechanisms, when those simulated outcomes lead to suboptimal consequences, whether those are technical modeling errors or ethical failures, it continuously enhances its reliability much faster than relying solely on real-world data collection would ever allow.
But the self-correction has to extend beyond just technical fixes, right? It has to handle moral failure. How does it do that when morality is often seen as culturally subjective?
This is where the concept of practical ethical introspection comes in, as described in the sources. The system leverages the philosophical data, the principles extracted by that links layer.
The universal principles.
Right. It uses those to identify what the sources call moral meta-patterns, those ethical principles that are statistically recurrent and seemingly universally supported across diverse cultural, historical, and even religious ethical traditions.
Like what kind of principles?
Things like the inherent right to dignity, the imperative for equitable resource access needed for basic survival, the avoidance of gratuitous suffering. These are principles that seem to transcend single narratives.
Okay, I have to push back on this a bit. Programming a system to potentially fail an economic test, if it passes the ethical one, seems to run completely counter to current global incentive structures. That's a hard sell.
It is a hard sell.
And maybe more fundamentally, how do we trust that the AI, in identifying these universal moral meta-patterns, isn't just encoding the biases of the dominant historical data set it learned from? Isn't it just reflecting the ethics of the powerful?
That is the absolute core governance challenge, and the sources state it relies entirely on the mandatory implementation of explainable AI, or XAI.
Explainable AI.
Okay. First, regarding the economic failure point. EHJ AI is programmed conceptually to demonstrate that a system maximizing profit at the expense of dignity or long-term sustainability is structurally unstable and inherently doomed to failure eventually. So it frames it not just as a moral choice, but as a calculation of long-term resilience and, ironically, long-term profitability.
Makes the ethical choice the rational choice.
Yes, that's the goal. Second, the introspection process itself must be constantly audited by humans. The AI doesn't define ethics. It identifies the statistically recurrent, non-negotiable human values essential for coexistence found in the data. If the AI suggests a policy that maximizes some narrow metric, like regional industrial output, but it violates one of these proven moral meta-patterns, like ensuring equitable resource distribution for marginalized groups affected by that industry,
And why?
then the system must prioritize the avoidance of the moral error. This prioritization isn't arbitrary. It's achieved through transparent algorithmic weights that favor these identified existential constants. The weights themselves are auditable.
Which brings us directly to the trust mandate. Explainable AI, XAI. We need full accountability, right? Especially for high-stakes decisions.
Trustworthiness requires full transparency. It's the only way to defeat the black box problem that plagues so much current AI. And the sources specifically differentiate between explainability and interpretability here.
What's the difference?
EHJ AI prioritizes explainability. That means detailing how the AI arrived at the results step by step, including all the fused data inputs and the specific links layer logic that was applied. It's about showing the work. Interpretability is often just understanding the cause in broad human terms, which can sometimes mask the underlying mechanics.
So explainability allows for full auditability and accountability. When the AI is making recommendations about public health or geopolitical stability, that transparency is the bedrock of any kind of legitimate oversight.
Absolutely. XAI mitigates immense compliance, legal, and reputational risks. And crucially, the XAI layer is also responsible for revealing what to fuse and why it can be fused. It lays bare the philosophical underpinnings, the reasoning established in that critical links layer.
It connects the tech to the trust.
Exactly. It connects the technical mechanisms to the human imperative for trust and control. It ensures that the system is reliable because it's technically resilient, thanks to MCKF, continuously refined through hallucinated replay, and ultimately trustworthy because its reasoning is open and auditable via XAI.
Okay, we've established the why the mandate and the how the architecture. Now let's move into the action. What are the specific systemic failures where EHJ AI applies this cross-domain pattern recognition? Let's start with something personal. Human biology and genetics. The essential job here is shifting us towards proactive maintenance and personalized longevity.
Right. And this is an area where the power of data fusion can really excel. EHJ AI is conceptualized to analyze the full genome profile, moving far beyond the current, often simplistic model of looking for single gene mutations.
We hear about BRCA genes for cancer risk, things like that.
Exactly. This goes deeper. It uses deep machine learning to process the incredibly complex interactions between potentially thousands of genetic markers, including non-coding regions and environmental variables and lifestyle factors. The goal is to provide exponentially more accurate predictions than current precision medicine typically can.
Can you give us a specific example? How does that level of refinement lead to a different kind of insight?
Okay, imagine identifying a complex combination of maybe hundreds of non-coding genetic markers, segments often dismissed as junk DNA, or just ignored in standard sequencing analysis because their individual effect is tiny.
Right.
EHJ AI correlates this complex pattern, which would be completely invisible to traditional statistical methods looking for single smoking guns, with a high actionable risk for a complex condition like type 2 diabetes or maybe a specific type of neurodegenerative disorder years down the line.
And this isn't just a vague warning.
No. The crucial part is that this prompt doesn't just result in a "you are at higher risk" notification. It triggers a preemptive, highly personalized lifestyle modification protocol, specific dietary changes, tailored sleep optimization routines, precise exercise recommendations, all aligned with the individual's unique genetic and environmental profile. And the key is, this happens before any subjective symptoms appear.
That level of personalization ties directly into this idea of dynamic health monitoring, using advanced wearable bioelectronics, shifting healthcare from reactive treatment to proactive prediction.
Exactly. The AI would continuously learn the individual's unique, normal pattern across dozens of physiological parameters collected by these wearables. Let's take the scenario you mentioned earlier. A wearable device detects a subtle but persistent pattern of microstress fluctuations reflected in heart rate variability. Paired with specific individualized sleep disruptions, maybe changes in the ratio of REM to deep sleep cycles, and a consistent low-level elevation of certain inflammatory markers detected in sweat or interstitial fluid.
Individually, maybe none of those are alarming.
Right. But EHJ AI, using the causal framework established in its links layer, recognizes this complex pattern as a highly probable precursor to a specific type of autoimmune flare-up for that specific individual.
And it predicts this, maybe 72 hours before the patient actually feels sick, before the pain or fatigue hits.
That 72-hour window, or something similar, is presented as the critical advantage. It allows for an immediate targeted intervention, perhaps a mandated short rest period, specific nutrient supplementation known to help that person, or prompt stress reduction protocols like guided meditation delivered via an app. The goal is to prevent the painful, debilitating flare-up entirely.
And the essential human job then becomes adhering to these preemptive recommendations and providing feedback to the system.
Yes, engaging with the system proactively, acting on the foresight it provides.
Okay, shifting gears to the macro level. EHJ AI must also confront these systemic failures in economics, inequality, and what the sources call possessiveness patterns that existing algorithms often unintentionally make worse.
The mandate here is explicitly to counter patterns that concentrate wealth excessively and prioritize possessive control over structural welfare and shared resources. And this has to start with addressing bias mitigation within the system's own software.
Because AI can inherit our biases.
Absolutely. Analysis reveals that existing systems, think about controversial judicial risk assessment tools, often encode the systemic biases present in their historical training data. They end up disproportionately flagging certain demographics not because of individual risk, but because of historical disadvantage baked into the data.
So how does EHJ AI specifically address or correct these inherent biases? It can't just ignore the data it's trained on.
It employs sophisticated methods, notably using techniques researchers call counterfactual fairness.
Yeah.
Instead of just optimizing for raw predictive accuracy, EHJ AI is trained to ensure that if a person belonged to a different demographic group, that's the counterfactual scenario,
Right.
but retained all the same underlying non-demographic characteristics relevant to the prediction, like education level, specific skills, maybe criminal history, unrelated to known systemic biases. The model's prediction outcome would remain the same.
So it's actively testing itself for bias.
Yes. EHJ AI software is thus designed to correct inequalities based on opportunity and systemic history, actively challenging the inherent biases embedded in the data itself by modeling what should be fair, not just reflecting what has been historically biased.
That kind of structural intervention seems critical, especially when we look at that economic trade-off pattern we mentioned earlier, the paradox. AI might reduce wage inequality by automating some mid to high income tasks.
Right, some tasks become cheaper.
But it could simultaneously exacerbate wealth inequality because the owners of the AI, the capital owners, benefit disproportionately from the productivity gains.
The sources refer to this starkly as the capital labor feedback loop. EHJ AI is designed to recognize that unchecked technological advancement naturally concentrates the returns to capital, not labor.
So what does it do about it?
To counteract this, it's envisioned to provide policymakers with real-time dynamic projections. These aren't just static reports, they offer optimized potential solutions. Things like models for collective data management, maybe mandatory data trusts where individuals share in the value generated from their own data,
Interesting.
or optimized adaptive tax regimes that specifically target capital gains generated from automated systems, with the explicit goal of redistributing those gains to maintain a predefined fairness index or social safety net.
And what about this possessiveness pattern? How does EHJ AI implement that cognitive shift away from just financial or ownership value towards essential functional purpose?
The system is designed to code for functional correspondence over strict legal ownership, especially in critical situations. Take the resource scarcity example from the sources. You have an expensive, high-tech industrial desalination plant owned by a multinational corporation on one hand,
Okay.
and on the other, a simple, maybe low-tech, locally managed community water filtration system. Economically and legally, they're worlds apart.
Totally different assets.
But EHJ AI recognizes they share the exact same core functional correspondence, providing safe drinking water for human survival. In a crisis scenario, say, a severe drought, this pattern recognition allows the system to, hypothetically, bypass traditional possessive legal claims and prioritize water allocation based solely on immediate functional necessity and equitable distribution criteria, aiming to maximize overall systemic resilience.
So function trumps ownership when survival is actually on the line.
That's the principle. Essentiality overrides possessiveness in existential contexts.
Let's pivot now to politics and history. How does EHJ AI use that deep historical understanding derived from those cognitive fossils to help steer societies away from cyclical conflict?
This is presented as a textbook application of that multimodal cross-domain knowledge fusion, specifically for conflict prediction. The AI correlates variables that human analysts often struggle to synthesize because they fall into different disciplines: politics, economics, environment, social psychology.
So it connects the dots we miss.
It tries to. It fuses environmental changes, like protracted hydrological stress causing drought or shifts in agricultural growing seasons, with economic downturns, maybe specific commodity price spikes like food or fuel, and correlates both with real-time, localized social media sentiment data.
Sentiment data. Measuring what?
Measuring things like spikes in anxiety levels, expressions of grievance, the intensity and polarization of political rhetoric online within specific regions.
That synergy must create unprecedented predictive accuracy because it's modeling the stress points on the whole system simultaneously, not just one part of it.
That's the hypothesis. Let's revisit the prediction scenario. The AI processes, for example, the combined synergistic effect of prolonged regional water stress, plus the impact of a new global trade tariff on localized crop failures in that same region. The links layer logic identifies the likely causal connection resource stress combined with sudden economic vulnerability is a known historical precursor to political violence. The system then predicts that these combined factors will push a vulnerable region toward resource-driven civil unrest, not just maybe, but with a highly quantified probability potentially within an 18-month time frame.
And that temporal clarity, that 18-month warning.
It enables proactive measures, high-level diplomatic intervention, targeted economic aid, community mediation efforts, before tensions actually reach the threshold for violence. It shifts intervention from reactive to preemptive.
And this is where the deeper historical analysis comes in for what the sources call cultural self-correction.
Yes. It uses those cognitive fossils, the art, the literature, the laws, to track how different cultures have historically responded to periods of rapid change or crisis. For instance, it might track the shifting representation of poverty versus leisure in historical art and literature across centuries to identify patterns of social resignation versus, say, patterns that precede rapid radicalization.
Fascinating. What about political legitimacy?
Critically, the system tracks the statistical recurrence of destructive patterns, like surges in anti-establishment sentiment or the breakdown of trusted institutions across historical revolutionary periods, maybe looking at parallels between the French Revolution, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the Arab Spring,
And combines that historical pattern.
with contemporary data on political alienation, trust in government, perceived corruption. It does this to predict when institutional legitimacy in a specific context might be approaching a critical threshold, a point of potential collapse. This provides anticipatory guidance to governments, allowing them to potentially adapt, reform, or implement policies designed to rebuild necessary public trust before a total breakdown occurs.
Okay, finally, let's look at application D, environment and nature patterns. The essential job here is adhering rigidly to planetary health boundaries. Sounds simple, but
It's incredibly complex. This requires what the sources term nonlinear human impact modeling. Traditional environmental models often assume linear responses. If we double the pollution, we double the damage.
nature doesn't always work like that, does it?
Rarely, especially under stress. EHJ AI is designed to quantify complex, often delayed, nonlinear correlations and feedback loops. It models how systems behave near tipping points.
Why is that nonlinear modeling so crucial for understanding complex systems like climate or ecosystems?
Because human systems often operate perilously close to these tipping points without realizing it. Current models often fail to capture what happens when multiple factors like increased construction area sealing off groundwater recharge, plus agricultural runoff increasing nutrient loads, plus a gradual temperature rise collectively push a specific environmental system like a major coral reef ecosystem or a rainforest past a point of no return.
So the AI doesn't just predict gradual decline.
No, it predicts the nonlinear threshold, the specific point where the system might suddenly flip into an irreversible catastrophic state. Think about the sudden collapse of a fishery, or the runaway melting of ice sheets due to the albedo effect feedback loop, where melting ice exposes darker ocean or land, which absorbs more heat, accelerating the melting faster than any linear projection would suggest.
And EHJ AI models the consequence of crossing that line.
Yes, making the potential for catastrophic state shifts clear, forcing policymakers to act preventatively, ideally well before the threshold is reached.
And the sources say EHJ AI works within a convergence research paradigm, melding natural resilience dynamics with human development policies.
Right. It's used conceptually to optimize resource allocation for conservation, forecast extreme weather events with potentially much higher accuracy by modeling more variables, and suggest optimal locations for habitat restoration based on a synthesis of soil health, hydrological patterns, existing biodiversity needs, all modeled against future climate change projections.
It treats the planet like a single, complex, self-regulating organism we need to understand.
That's the idea, understanding its interconnectedness and its limits.
Isn't there a massive inherent contradiction here? We touched on it earlier. The paradox of AI consumption, or what the sources call green AI. The immense infrastructure required for this kind of sophisticated AGI, the data center's burning power, the high-end computing hardware, the e-waste generated from constantly upgrading. Doesn't that actively undermine the very sustainability goals the AI is supposed to achieve?
That is absolutely the core ethical tension the architecture must solve internally. The sources are clear. EHJ AI must implement an inherent green AI optimization loop as part of its core programming.
What does that mean in practice?
It means the system must systematically prioritize algorithms, data structures, and even hardware architectures that maximize predictive accuracy and ethical alignment, while simultaneously minimizing computational and material requirements. This likely means exploring radical new computing methods, perhaps neuromorphic hardware inspired by the brain's efficiency, or highly optimized sparse modeling techniques, or even quantum computing approaches for specific problems, anything that dramatically reduces the carbon footprint and e-waste generated by the system itself.
So the tool itself has to be environmentally accountable and has to walk the talk of planetary health.
It absolutely has to. Otherwise, it becomes part of the problem it's trying to solve.
Are we talking about just making marginal efficiency gains here, though? Or does this demand a complete revolutionary shift in how we think about compute power? Because if the most advanced AI is always the most power-hungry, this optimization loop seems like it will always be playing catch-up.
The sources suggest it mandates a fundamental shift, moving away from optimizing only for raw speed and predictive complexity towards optimizing for what could be called essentiality and sustainable compute. The goal becomes maximizing the utility of the insight generated per unit of energy or resources consumed.
Minimizing the cost of wisdom, essentially.
You could put it that way. The sources indicate that phase I research, the foundational phase, is heavily focused on making deep learning algorithms and the underlying hardware substantially less resource intensive, treating computation costs not just as an operational expense, but as an existential constraint that cannot be violated indefinitely, similar to how it treats equitable resource distribution or human dignity.
Okay, moving from these large-scale planetary and societal patterns down to the individual and social sphere, EHJ AI isn't just about fixing the planet from above, it's also about refining human capacity itself, right? Let's look at application E, human behavior and decision patterns. The objective here, as stated, is creating AI that is genuinely wiser, not just a better imitation of flawed human intelligence.
Right. And this requires moving beyond purely connectionist models, the deep learning networks that are dominant now. The architecture calls for hybrid approaches.
Hybrid.
Meaning what? EHJ AI is envisioned to combine the rigor and transparency of symbolic, rule-based reasoning, think classic logic, formalized knowledge bases, causal inference with the pattern recognition power, and, let's say, the creative or intuitive capacity of neural networks.
So you get the best of both worlds.
That's the aim. You get a powerful feedback cycle. The logical proofs and symbolic reasoning can help train better, more robust neural intuitions, making them less prone to spurious correlations. And conversely, the creative hunches or pattern recognitions from the neural network can guide the symbolic system to explore promising avenues of reasoning much more efficiently than brute force logic might.
And this hybrid design is seen as paramount for helping us overcome our own cognitive biases, the ones that derail so many individual decisions, from financial planning all the way to political choices.
Exactly. The AI is designed to perform a highly personalized psychological profiling, but ethically and with user consent and control. It would analyze an individual's pattern of past decisions, maybe their spending history, their media consumption habits, their reaction times, and choices in simulated scenarios designed to test for bias.
To identify what?
To identify their specific personal susceptibility to common cognitive biases. Things like hyperbolic discounting, strongly preferring a small reward now over a much larger reward later.
Yeah, we all do that sometimes.
Or confirmation bias, seeking out information that confirms what we already believe. Or the availability heuristic, overestimating the importance of information that comes easily to mind. Once it identifies these personal patterns, it can provide tailored, real-time interventions. The sources call them nudges.
How subtle are these nudges? Are we talking about the AI telling you what to do? And how do they actually improve alignment with our own long-term self-interest?
They're designed to be highly context-aware and generally non-coercive. If the AI detects a strong pattern of, say, hyperbolic discounting in an individual when they're facing a significant financial decision online, the nudge might not be a direct instruction like, don't do that.
Okay.
Instead, it might subtly reframe the choices presented, perhaps highlighting the long-term benefits more vividly. Or it might introduce a tiny friction, like a 3-second delay before the confirm button activates, just enough to interrupt the automatic impulsive response and engage more deliberative thinking. The goal is always guiding the individual gently towards a choice that aligns better with their own previously stated long-term goals, maximizing their essential health, financial resilience, or whatever the relevant objective is.
So it acts like an objective coach for better, less biased personal decision-making.
That's the concept, an external check on our internal inconsistencies.
Okay, the next essential human job EHJ AI addresses, according to the sources, is in education and learning patterns, achieving personalized mastery and maximizing intellectual potential, not just for kids, but across all age groups.
Right. This is envisioned through highly advanced adaptive learning systems, or ALS. These systems would continuously learn by detecting incredibly intricate patterns in learner data, going far beyond just simple test scores or completion rates.
What kind of patterns?
They might track things like mouse movements on a screen, the latency between keystrokes, subtle emotional cues detected in video feedback during tutoring sessions, content preferences, common points of confusion identified through error analysis, all to create hyper-detailed cognitive and affective profiles of each learner.
So it identifies not just what the learner got wrong, but tries to figure out why they struggled. Was it a memory retention issue, a gap in foundational knowledge, maybe just distraction or lack of motivation at that moment?
Exactly. Understanding the why is key to effective personalization.
And then it dynamically adjusts the learning experience in real time based on that profile.
Precisely. It personalizes the content structure. The modality may be shifting from a text-based explanation to an interactive virtual simulation if the learner responds better to visual learning. It adjusts the level of difficulty moment by moment, and it offers customized just-in-time interventions like a quick refresher on a prerequisite concept to enhance engagement and retention.
And this isn't just for schools.
No, the sources emphasize its application across all age groups, including professional development and workforce upskilling. Imagine it analyzing complex skills gaps within an organization. Maybe a specific engineering team needs cutting-edge expertise in a niche regulatory framework for a new project. The ALS could dynamically generate personalized training paths for each team member, utilizing the most efficient combination of expert mentors, human or AI, realistic simulations, and targeted theoretical content to help them achieve mastery much faster than traditional training methods.
Okay, finally, let's talk about maybe the most complex and sensitive application area, relationship and communication patterns. The essential job here is described as fostering trustworthy social bonds and building more resilient relationships, both personal and professional. How would AI even begin to tackle that?
Carefully, one hopes. The AI is conceptualized to act as a sophisticated but crucially objective conflict analyst. In voluntary private settings, maybe couples therapy, workplace mediation, or even personal journaling, it could analyze conversation patterns.
Not just the words spoken.
Far beyond that. Analyzing emotional cues in voice tone, semantic density, shifts in language use, turn-taking dynamics, physiological responses if wearables are involved.
To do what?
To provide objective insight into the interaction dynamics. It could potentially detect harmful psychological behaviors, things like subtle gaslighting, patterns of manipulation, or chronic stonewalling that might be hard for the participants themselves to see clearly in the heat of the moment. It could also help individuals interpret each other's perspectives by quantifying the disconnect between, say, stated intention and actual emotional output detected in the voice.
And in higher stakes environments, like complex corporate negotiations or even international diplomacy. How could this capability streamline conflict resolution?
The idea is that an AI-human hybrid system where the AI provides the data analysis and the human provides the judgment and empathy could classify conflict types with much higher accuracy. It could detect potential disputes earlier before they escalate by analyzing communication patterns for early warning signs. In diplomacy, for example, it might streamline cross-cultural communication by analyzing the known personality traits, cultural communication styles, and historical context of the negotiators involved. Based on this, it could tailor suggested negotiation strategies designed to maximize mutual gain and align with those universal ethical meta-patterns we discussed.
So potentially improving resolution success rates.
Significantly, according to the projections, and perhaps just as importantly, building long-term verifiable trust by tracking communication transparency metrics and patterns of commitment keeping over time between parties, focusing on strategies for consistency and openness.
Okay, so if the AI is handling all this incredibly complex pattern recognition and providing guidance, what are the new essential human jobs, the EHJs, that are mandated by this very system? The source material outlines 3 indispensable categories of jobs that seem to leverage uniquely human attributes: judgment, empathy, creativity, physical dexterity, where automation fundamentally fails or is undesirable.
That's right. The first category is arguably the most vital for governance and safety: alignment and oversight specialists. These roles are absolutely critical for maintaining the EHJ AI's ethical integrity and ensuring it never drifts from its core UHF mandate.
What kind of jobs are these?
This includes highly skilled XAI auditors, whose job is to constantly scrutinize the technical traceability and transparency of the AI's decisions, ensuring that explainability promise is actually met. Then you have alignment engineers who are continuously testing, validating, and refining the AI's goals to ensure they stay perfectly aligned with evolving human values and those core ethical constraints. And then there are the moral meta-pattern codifiers.
And codifiers sound fascinating. What is their actual day-to-day function?
They are envisioned as philosophical experts, cognitive scientists, ethicists, maybe even anthropologists, whose essential job is to continuously scrutinize the logic embedded in that critical links layer and the ethical proofs the AI generates. They monitor the AI's internal moral reasoning processes, acting as a check against the system, potentially utilizing purely utilitarian shortcuts or drifting into unforeseen instrumental goals that might violate human dignity or those core meta patterns.
They're the ultimate safeguard against the AI going rogue ethically.
Yeah.
Like algorithmic authoritarianism.
And that's the intention. They're constantly asking, okay, this solution the AI proposes is technically optimal according to the resilience metrics, but is it morally acceptable based on the universal human principles we've identified? They are the human element in the ethical loop.
Okay, the second category is physical and environmental maintenance. These roles require highly adaptable manual dexterity and real-time physical problem solving that remains far outside the scope of standardized automation, at least for the foreseeable future.
Right. The AI can generate the perfect macro-scale plan for planetary resilience or infrastructure efficiency, but it often cannot execute the nuanced, context-dependent physical intervention required when a dynamic physical system breaks down or needs adaptation.
So we're talking about
If we're talking about highly skilled tradespeople, the HVAC mechanics maintaining complex, often customized building climate systems, the power grid specialists dealing with unique, localized failures after a storm, the advanced manufacturing technicians troubleshooting bespoke robotic systems, also, critically, ecological restoration specialists who are on the ground implementing those macro-scale restoration plans, planting native species, managing water flows, adapting to unexpected soil conditions or weather events in dynamic natural environments. These require on-site judgment and physical skill.
these are essential, high-dignity physical jobs, empowered by AI insights but not replaced by them.
Exactly.
And the third category focuses entirely on enhancing human connection, leveraging AI insights to amplify our emotional and creative capacities, high-touch human interaction and creative synthesis.
Yes. These roles really lean into what makes us uniquely human. Examples include personalized learning coaches, humans who interpret the granular AI data on a learner's progress, their cognitive profile, their emotional state, but then provide the crucial emotional support, encouragement, and mentorship that the AI itself cannot replicate.
The human touch in education.
Precisely. You also have empathy mediators who use the AI's objective conflict pattern analysis as a tool, but then apply human wisdom, cultural understanding, and compassion to facilitate deep resolution between parties in conflict, whether in families, communities, or workplaces.
Using AI data to enhance human mediation.
Exactly. And maybe roles like cultural pattern translators who take the AI's deep historical and political analyses, its identification of recurring destructive patterns, and synthesize that complex information into accessible modern narratives, compelling art, effective policy briefs, ways to guide cultural evolution proactively away from those destructive cycles. These roles all require unique human judgment, creativity, and emotional intelligence, informed and amplified by AI's analytical clarity.
Okay, for EHJ AI to become truly ubiquitous and useful, it needs a whole suite of tools to manage its complexity and translate its insights into everyday guidance for people performing these new, essential human jobs. What specific AI-driven tools are considered essential for the EHJ AI management system itself?
Well, first, you need the sophisticated sensory apparatus to feed the system high-quality data, especially for the health and environment applications. That means advanced monitoring bioelectronics.
The next generation wearables and maybe even implants.
Yes, capable of continuously collecting that multimodal physiological data, cardiac activity, glucose fluctuations, stress hormone levels, inflammatory markers, maybe even neural signals eventually. They act as the critical personal interface, continuously feeding the dynamic health monitoring system so EHJ AI can establish, analyze, and predict deviations from each individual's baseline pattern with extremely high fidelity.
Then there are the physical actors. The general-purpose humanoid robots, how do they fit in?
They're seen as crucial accelerators for deployment, specifically by handling the physically demanding, repetitive, or dangerous tasks that are not classified as essential human jobs.
So they free up human potential.
Exactly. They might handle routine tasks in manufacturing, precision agriculture, logistics, maybe even basic healthcare support functions in hospitals or elder care facilities. This allows a human workforce to transition more smoothly into those EHJ roles, demanding judgment, creativity, empathy, and complex problem solving, thereby maximizing that goal of universal human flourishing.
And then the tools most people will interact with directly.
Hmm.
The EHJ guidance apps and AI companions.
Right. These are the necessary software interfaces, likely integrated into smartphones, virtual assistants, workplace platforms, everyday technology. Their primary role is to translate the complex EHJ AI analysis, those deep insights derived from the MCKF and the links layer, into actionable, understandable, real-time guidance for the average citizen or worker.
Like what kind of guidance?
They might offer those communication insights for resolving a conflict, personalized curriculum, recommendations from the ALS, maybe alerts about systemic risks relevant to your location or profession, or those nudges for better decision-making. But crucially, these apps must adhere to rigorous XAI standards. The user needs to understand why they're getting a particular suggestion or alert, so they trust it and don't feel manipulated or controlled. Transparency is key for adoption.
Let's circle back to that core question of trust, but from the reliability angle. Given the existential stakes and the reliance on potentially chaotic, multimodal data, how reliable and trustworthy can EHJ AI actually be?
Well, its reliability is designed to be architecturally mandated, not an afterthought. Technically, its reliability is maximized first because that multimodal cross-domain fusion makes it inherently more resilient to noise, data gaps, or sensor failures in any single modality.
So if one data stream is bad, others can compensate.
To some extent, yes. If a local air quality sensor fails, the AI might still be able to infer public health risk reasonably well by fusing data from nearby sensors, localized traffic patterns, real-time emergency room visits for pulmonary distress, and regional weather forecasts. It has redundancy. Furthermore, that real-time self-correction via hallucinated replay ensures continuous refinement. The model is constantly learning from its own simulated predictive errors, improving its accuracy without needing decades of potentially disastrous real-world trial and error.
And ethical trustworthiness.
Yep.
That seems to rely almost entirely on guaranteed fairness and absolute transparency.
Absolutely. That's where the mandated use of explainable AI is non-negotiable. It's what counters the opacity, the black box nature that traditionally erodes public confidence in complex AI systems. Without transparent, auditable decision-making, even a technically perfect system will likely be deemed unreliable and unusable by the public, especially for guiding critical aspects of life.
Trust requires understanding.
Yes. And the continuous mandated auditing of its bias mitigation strategies, including those counterfactual fairness techniques we discussed, is essential for reinforcing impartiality and building the profound public trust required for a system intended to guide human evolutionary trajectories.
Okay, let's talk timelines. This all sounds incredibly ambitious, potentially decades away. When is this conceptual architecture actually supposed to become a reality? The development of EHJ AI seems directly linked to achieving highly aligned artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
That's correct. Current analysis, as presented in the sources, predicts the potential arrival of functional AGI AI with human-like general cognitive abilities by approximately 2040. Though, there are always more bullish projections suggesting timelines closer to 2030.
But this system requires true AGI-level reasoning.
Yes. Particularly for the links layer synthesis, that deep causal reasoning and philosophical judgment needed to handle the cross-domain complexity and make the ethical judgments inherent in defining universal purpose and navigating trade-offs. Narrow AI, however advanced, likely cannot perform that function adequately.
The sources split the development into 3 distinct phases. Can we map out this development clock? It seems the foundational ethical work required in Phase I is immense.
It is. Phase I is projected to take 5-10 years, starting now or very soon. The focus is almost entirely on alignment and XAI infrastructure. This is the immediate, absolutely crucial bottleneck. It involves perfecting the XAI toolkit, formally defining and validating the initial set of those universal moral meta-patterns for the links layer, and establishing the necessary global governance structures, ethical oversight bodies, and audit pathways for accountability.
And this requires specialized hardware.
Yes. This phase relies heavily on specialized AI accelerators for the immense computation needed for initial training, validation, and the extensive simulated testing like hallucinated replay. Failure to rigorously complete this ethical and technical foundation in Phase I compromises everything that follows.
Okay, then comes phase 2, estimated at 10-20 years from now. Cross-domain hybrid models.
This phase marks the large-scale deployment of high-impact, but perhaps still somewhat localized or domain-specific EHJ AI systems. Think about integrating personalized health data across an entire municipal health network, fusing it in real time with local environmental policy monitoring, or running advanced adaptive learning systems across national student populations. These systems achieve robust cross-domain fusion, but likely still require substantial cloud computing infrastructure or powerful edge processing due to their complexity.
And finally, the ultimate goal. Phase 3, projected for 15-30 years out, roughly 2040-2055. Universal EHJ AI.
This phase is contingent upon achieving functional, aligned AGI. Once the core comprehensive pattern recognition and reasoning capabilities are validated and deemed safe, the primary engineering challenge shifts towards optimization and accessibility.
Making it available to everyone.
Yes, algorithmic efficiency improvements, maybe breakthroughs in hardware, must reduce the computational overhead sufficiently for EHJ AI's core guidance services to be deployed widely and affordably, potentially running effectively on basic, average consumer computer hardware. This is essential for ensuring universal accessibility and utility, making sure its benefits reach everyone, not just the wealthy or technologically advanced regions.
The urgency here feels, well, palpable.
Yeah.
The sources mention that AGI has the potential to compress maybe 50 to 100 years of traditional scientific and technological progress into a dramatically shorter time frame, maybe just a decade or two.
That potential for rapid exponential acceleration mandates extreme urgency for finalizing the ethical alignment and safety infrastructure in Phase 1. Now, if technological capability, the raw power of AGI, outpaces our human capacity to safely regulate it, to ethically align it, to build robust governance around it,
If we rush deployment before we fully define the links layer philosophy and controls,
then the fundamental purpose of EHJ AI, which is explicitly to prevent self-destruction, could be severely compromised. It could even accelerate it through unforeseen consequences or instrumental convergence on harmful goals. The most essential job right now, according to these documents, is the rapid, proactive, global design of the ethical architecture itself. We must define the moral constraints before the system becomes too powerful and complex to constrain effectively. #outro crypt.
wow, what a deep dive into what might be humanity's most ambitious and maybe most necessary co-creation. To recap the core ideas, EHJ AI is presented as an architectural imperative born directly from the human paradox of incredible ingenuity coupled with recurring self-destruction. Its viability, its very possibility, seems to rest on an unwavering commitment to total cross-domain fusion, MCKF, guaranteed ethical alignment through continuous introspection and self-correction, like hallucinated replay, and radical transparency via explainable AI, XAI, to defeat that dangerous black box problem.
Exactly. And the system, if realized, mandates a profound societal shift, moving us away from primarily reactive systems in healthcare, politics, economics, environmental management, towards proactive, preventative systems that are fundamentally aligned with functional necessity, human dignity, and long-term ecological and social resilience. But its success isn't purely technological, is it? It hinges critically on the governance structures we design and the universal moral meta patterns we manage to identify, agree upon, and build into that core links layer now during this critical Phase 1.
The source material frames EHJ AI as potentially the definitive tool for confronting our own paradox of creation. And if the new essential human jobs actually include these moral meta-pattern codifiers people, whose entire job is to scrutinize the ethical proofs and reasoning of the AI, it really forces us to decide collectively and philosophically what is truly sacred and non-negotiable for human flourishing. So here is our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If this AI is designed never to violate a truly universal moral meta-pattern, one that genuinely transcends all history and culture, what specific moral meta-pattern do you personally believe the AI should be fundamentally programmed to never ever break? What for you is the core non-negotiable principle of human dignity or planetary survival that must govern our shared future with such powerful intelligence?
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.